I drank so much coffee earlier today, and now I'm just like, I'm so jittery. Let's do this! Hi guys, this is Saro Lynch-Thomason. If you like traditional songs, folk songs, history, or folklore, then I recommend that you go ahead and hit that subscribe button below. Welcome to another episode of Songs That Speak. Before we dive in, I'm excited to let you know that Songs That Speak is sponsored in part by a grant from the Country Dance and Song Society, or CDSS. CDSS supports people in building and sustaining vibrant communities through participatory dance, music, and song. You can find out more at cdss.org. So what is hollering? It might sound silly, it might sound strange, but I guarantee you, no matter where you're from, your ancestors have hollered and so have you. In this episode, we'll talk about what hollering is, explore different types of hollering, and learn how we can all holler more. Hollering, broadly defined, is a call, cry, or phrase used to communicate with people or animals, usually over a long distance. Hollering is particularly useful in agricultural, rural, or water-based settings like rivers or lakes, places where people are living and working together but might be distanced from each other during the day. Think of farming, herding, logging, hunting, or fishing. Hollering is an old, really old, human art. It probably predates human language. Some biomusicologists suggest that hunting cultures used hollering over 700,000 years ago, during the Ice Age. The idea is that as hunting societies transitioned to herding societies, people started to develop calls to herd semi-domesticated animals. Hollering could have also been particularly useful in ancient nomadic cultures. As people traveled together, they would have often been separated by several miles. Hollering could be a way of communicating, "I'm hurt," "I found water," or "Hey, there's some great fruit over here." What's important to understand about hollering is that it mostly doesn't involve words. Hollers usually consist of vocables, syllables that don't have a set meaning. Singing "la la la la" is an example of singing with vocables. So why use vocables instead of just shouting out words to communicate? It's easy for the sounds of syllables to become obscure as they travel through the air over long distances, and the natural sounds of insects, rivers, wind, or rain can make those syllables even harder to hear. What's much easier for a listener to recognize are patterns of musical notes and rhythmic uses of sounds over long distances. And when I say long distances, I mean several miles. With the right conditions, hollers can be heard up to 4 miles away. Most cultures have had or still have some element of hollering, and it can be used for all kinds of daily communication, whether to announce that there's a thief on the loose or to call people together for a meal. Some of the better-known forms of hollering in the Western world are yodeling from the Central Alps and kulening from Scandinavia, both of which were developed to call to herd animals. My Norwegian friend always says that I pronounce kulening wrong, but I did my best. Here in the US, we know that hollering has been a part of African American and white cultures since at least the colonial period. In agricultural settings, enslaved people would holler from one field to another to communicate, and sometimes this communication could be coded. It could be a way to make plans without the notice of the overseer. By the mid-20th century, hollering in the United States had mostly died out, and we'll talk more about why later. But there was one place where people continued to holler well after their neighbors had stopped, and that place was Sampson County, North Carolina. In the 1970s, folklorists came and recorded hollers that were still being used in Sampson County. One tiny community in the county, Spivey's Corner, was even hosting an annual hollering contest that drew thousands of people every year. Some of the best examples we have of hollering in the United States come from Sampson County. So let's explore the many uses of hollering through some of the awesome hollers shared by folks in this area. As always, if you want to learn some of the hollers that I demonstrate in this episode, check out my companion video, tagged here and linked in the notes below. So the first kind of holler we'll talk about is functional hollering. These are hollers used to help accomplish a task. So say you're working in a field and you need to call to a friend or family member to bring you some water. In Sampson County, some people called for water like this.
Hoo! Woo!
Another type of functional holler you could use would be to call workers in from the field for a meal. That holler could sound like this. Another very important kind of functional holler is hollering for animals. For thousands of years, herding communities have used hollers to call to goats, sheep, and cows. Even in urban settings, many of us use hollers to call to dogs, cats, and other pets. All it takes is a series of notes that the animal or animals learn to recognize and associate with food or attention. Hog and cow hollers were very common in Sampson County. Here's an example of a cow holler.
Suki, suki, suka. Suki, suki, suka. Suki, suka.
By the way, sometimes when people who are unfamiliar with hollering are told something like, "This is a holler for sheep," they might think that there's one distinctive call for that type of animal that's been used for millennia. But that's not the case. Animals learn to respond to specific calls from their owners. In Sampson County, some farmers allowed their hogs to roam across shared pasture land, and each farmer developed his own distinctive call that his hogs learned to recognize. So when you see someone like YouTube superstar Yona Yenton culining to cows in a field and proposing in her video notes that the cows are responding to some ancient memory of these calls, it's more likely that the cows have gotten used to being called to by humans in their lifetimes, and Yona's calls sound enough like someone else's that they decide to saunter on over, maybe expecting supper. Holler type number 2 is communicative hollers. These are hollers used to communicate a message. You might holler to let someone know that you're on your way to see them, or just to tell them good morning. Here's a call and response communication holler from Sampson County that's a kind of Marco Polo, helping two people locate each other near a meeting spot.
Ahoo, ahoo, ahoo. Woo-hoo. Woo-hoo.
Holler type number 3 is very important, distress hollers. If you fell and hurt yourself, if your house caught fire, or if you were lost, this would be the quickest way to call your neighbors to help. And the way that these hollers sounded in Sampson County might not surprise you. That basic siren sound was an almost universally recognizable distress call in Sampson County. You might be wondering, does that kind of call predate the use of sirens on emergency vehicles? I'm not sure. Some folks in Sampson County did holler in imitation of the sirens from passing fire trucks, but these hollers sounded pretty distinct from the common distress holler. So which came first, the human siren call or the sirens used on emergency vehicles? Tell me what you think in the comments. That wasn't the only kind of distress call in Sampson County. From farm to farm, people also had their own individual distress hollers, so you had to keep an ear out for each person's special call. Our last type of holler is expressive hollers. These are hollers used to express how you're feeling. These kinds of hollers could be sung the same way over and over, or they could be completely spontaneous, sung once and then never sung again. Here's a holler from Sampson County resident Leonard Emanuel. It was his way of saying good morning and that he was feeling fine.
Whoa, wahoo, whoa, wahoo, whoa, wahoo, whoa, wahoo, whoa, wahoo, whoa, wahoo, who are you, who are you, whoa, are you?
Expressive hollering can be done solo, but it can also be done communally. There's documentation of communal expressive hollering in enslaved African American communities. And in Sampson County, men would holler together for hours at corn shuckings and other get-togethers. Expressive hollering can be done so many different ways. Watch the video tagged here if you want to see me do a wider variety of these calls. We've heard enough Sampson County hollers by now that you might have noticed some consistent characteristics. These hollers were often sung in a high falsetto and often involved what are called vocal breaks, the sound that happens when you switch from your chest voice to your head voice and vice versa. Ee-ah, ah-wee. That flipping sound, that breaking sound, is a vocal break. You can often hear vocal breaks in hollering and crooning. It's important to keep in mind that all of the hollers collected in Sampson County were collected from white hollerers, and hollering in African American or other communities could sound pretty different. For example, this is a holler from Annie Grace Horn Dodson, an African American woman who grew up hollering with her family on their farm in western Alabama in the early 20th century.
Whoa, whoa, yeah, yeah, whoa, whoa, yeah, yeah.
So why don't we holler like we used to? There are many reasons, but a lot of it boils down to technology and noise. We have instant communication now. We can use our cell phones or email to talk to one another, and if we need help, we can call 911. Our rural spaces are also a lot louder than they used to be. We have planes, tractors, passing cars playing music, and all that noise obscures hollers that could otherwise be heard. Some forms of hollering have transitioned to become a performance art. There are modern-day bands and musicians that use historic herding calls in their music. I'm going to mispronounce some of these names, but I'll do my best. Merke, Yallerhorn, and Sofia Szczejenko. But is there a place in our lives for the practical use of hollering for communication? In our day-to-day lives, we still holler without thinking about it. We call to pets and livestock, or we shout over a long distance to get a friend's attention. And there are plenty of rural spaces where cell phone reception is spotty at best, so hollering can still be practical in lakeside and farming communities, or on hikes and canoe trips. Expressive hollering is also a great emotional release. It's a powerful combination of singing and screaming, so you can use it to express yourself, even if it's just in the privacy of your home or your car. I hope you feel inspired to add some hollering to your life. Check out the notes below for a few more resources on hollering. And if you already holler or grew up hollering, please tell me more in the comments below. Until next time, have a good day, be well, and sing on.
Wahoo! Oops, messed that up.